faces a considerable challenge in preparing for Brexit, and yesterday the Public Accounts Committee said there's a real risk the Department for Transport won't be ready in the event of the UK departing the EU without a negotiated deal. Why is that the Department for Transport not ready?
Well, the Department of Transport has been putting a number of elements of preparation in place. It is one of the departments that has had legislation going through the House, for example, in preparation for these all scenarios.
But they're clear. But we heard that they're not ready. How will you make sure that that department, and indeed all others, are brought back on track?
Oh, the work that the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union is doing in bringing together the departments, in looking at the preparedness, this is looked at constantly, both preparedness for deal, preparedness for no deal. As I say, there have been various elements of the preparations that have needed to be put in place, including elements in relation to Parliament.
I think we remain concerned that time is ticking and things are not ready. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Prime Minister, can I ask, are you concerned about the scale of the challenges that will face the NHS and most importantly patients in the event that we do crash out with no deal in a no transition in 120 days?
Well, you know, Chairman, I'm presenting a good deal to Parliament, which I hope that Parliament will recognise as a good deal and will understand that. But the Department for Health and... Sorry.
I just wanted to come back to that my opening comments, that given the parliamentary arithmetic, it does look increasingly likely that we could crash out with no deal. And given the scale of the consequences for patients, we're looking at supplies of critical medicines, medical products and devices, many areas where they can't be stockpiled, for example, because they have a very short shelf life, complex biologicals. There are so many patients that will face very serious disruption to essential supplies and medicines. Is that keeping you awake at night?
I'm ensuring that, the Department of Health and Social Care is obviously doing a lot of work in this area, but I do come back, and they are looking at what is necessary in were it the circumstances of a no deal. But of course, the way to ensure that we get the good deal and that we are able to see that smooth and orderly exit from the European Union when we leave on the 29th of March next year is to ratify the deal that the government has negotiated with the European Union.
Can I just take you back to a point that Yvette Cooper made earlier? Could any responsible government allow the scale of chaos that would ensue if we had no deal and no transition? Could any responsible government allow that? Could you allow that to happen, Prime Minister?
I think the role of a responsible government in these circumstances is to ensure that government is prepared for any scenario all scenarios that develop, and to ensure that where there are potential difficulties, that those are mitigated to the greatest extent possible. That's the work that's being done by DEXU and by departments across government in relation to this issue.
Yes, I accept that contingency planning is now happening to try and mitigate it, but would you accept that there would still be serious consequences for patients if we were to leave with no deal, and could you allow that to happen?
Yeah. The Department of Health and Social Care is putting in place arrangements to ensure that in those circumstances it would still be possible for people to access the medicines that are required.
But do you accept that that wouldn't happen for everybody?
Sorry, do
you accept that that wouldn't happen for everybody, though, Prime Minister? Even with good contingency planning, which is happening rather belatedly, that there would be patients that would be seriously impacted by shortages of essential supplies of medicines and devices? Well,
the whole point of the work that the DHSC is doing is to ensure that those medicines and devices are available in all circumstances.
If they advise you that they won't be, and that you receive advice that there will be disruption in spite of careful planning, would you give us your assurance that you wouldn't allow us to crash out with no deal if that would cause serious disruption to patients?
Well, the decision that is going to be taken on December the 11th by members of the House of Commons is what is pertinent in relation to this. That decision will be about whether to accept a deal which is a good deal for the United Kingdom, which enables that smooth and orderly. Because a point that is little focused on but is relevant, particularly relevant in relation to these matters, is that the withdrawal agreement, of course, sets up the implementation period. And it is that implementation period that allows that orderly exit from the European Union.
Right, but I'm afraid the parliamentary arithmetic is such that it looks as if that isn't going to pass the Commons. Can I ask, in your letter to the nation, you refer to the 394 million a week to the NHS. Could you confirm for me that that 394 million a week would happen whatever happens on the 11th, that if we have no Brexit, or indeed we have your future arrangements, would we still have that 394 million a week?
The government has made a commitment to the National Health Service and to the funding of the National Health Service. We set that out in the budget. We set that out in the budget in October. So what I am working for, and I think if anybody's concerned about these matters, that this is another reason for focusing on the deal that is being negotiated with the European Union.
Could I just stop you there, Prime Minister? Because my question to you is, would it happen irrespective of the deal? Is that promise still in place? We have made
that commitment to the National Health Service. But I think in relation to all of the other matters that you're talking about, Chairman, this is a point of focus on the December the 11th, when members of Parliament will be...
So are you saying to me it won't happen?
We've made a commitment.
Is this a threat to members of Parliament that we won't have that money? No, it's not. I'm not. So it'll happen irrespective of it? That was just my question.
It is not. I have said we have made a commitment to the National Health Service. We made that because we believe it is right for the National Health Service. You've raised a number of other issues in your questions, and I come back to the point that those are exactly the sort of issues that members may be thinking about when they're looking at we have a decision on December the 11th whether to deliver on the vote of the British people in a way that protects jobs and our economy and livelihoods and allows a smooth and orderly exit from the EU or not.
Right. So just coming back to that letter to the nation, you've written to the nation, you're now travelling around the country. Why won't you now ask them if this is the Brexit that they voted for? Is this what they meant by Brexit?
I think you're aware, Chairman, of my position in relation to the question of the second referendum. Parliament if I may, there are several aspects to this. Parliament overwhelmingly gave the vote to the British people as to whether or not to leave the European Union. I believe it is a matter of the issue of the integrity of politicians and people's trust in politicians that we actually deliver on that vote. And there were many people who came to democracy, who voted in that election, who hadn't voted before, and I think whose views about democracy would be severely damaged if they felt that politicians just said, no, we didn't like the answer you gave, so why don't you have another look? That's the first point I make. I think it is important for our democracy that we deliver on the vote that people took in 2016. But actually, if you look at the practicalities of this issue, it is clear that any second referendum that would be held, if that were the case, would not be able to be held by the 29th of March next year. We would be leaving on the 29th of March next year, and so what would be the circumstance in that?
You would have to extend Article 50 to allow for a referendum, which the Europeans have indicated they would be happy to do.
There's a paradox here. If you extend Article 50, actually you're then in the business of renegotiating the deal. This is the point. The deal is the deal at this point in time, and people look at the deal. But setting aside any concerns I have about extending Article 50, actually not delivering on the vote of the British people, that's my fundamental concern about all these suggestions of a second referendum or going back to the people with a vote in some form. People voted to leave the European Union. It is our duty to deliver that for people.
Right, but my understanding is that Article 50 could be extended to allow for a referendum on your deal. It wouldn't negate your deal, it wouldn't cancel the deal. It would just allow you to decide, it would allow the people to give you their verdict on whether this is what they meant by Brexit.
No, first of all, I mean, my point about democracy still stands. I think it's absolutely important that we deliver on the vote that people gave. Having given overwhelmingly this Parliament Parliament gave people that vote. And I really believe that we should deliver on that. But no, what is clear is that any extension to Article 50, anything like that, reopens the negotiations, reopens the deal. And at that point, the deal can go, frankly, in any direction.
So is that what you have been explicitly told? I'm sorry, I must move on in a minute to other colleagues, but I think that's a really important point. Have you been told by the European Union that you would have to reopen negotiations were you to hold a referendum based on your deal, to ask the British people whether this is what they meant by Brexit? Is this their informed consent?
What is very clear and what has been made clear is that this is the deal that they have negotiated with the European Union. So any suggestion of that deal might be rejected. I still come back to the point that actually I think the most important reason why we should not be going down the route of a second referendum is that we ask the British people, they've given us their view, and we should deliver on that view. There are different views as to how we should deliver on that view, but I believe that we should deliver on it. I believe we owe it to the British people, having given them the choice, to actually make that choice happen for them.
Well, I'm afraid it would be a bit, in my view, like wheeling someone into the operating theatre based on a consent form they'd signed two years ago without really knowing what the operation was and being able to give proper, valid, informed consent after weighing up the risks and benefits of the actual operation. Would that not be a reasonable point?
Well, but I think another point, I think if you were to go down the route, we would simply find ourselves in a period of more uncertainty and more division in this country. Now is the time for this country to come back together and to look at our future outside the European Union, not to be encouraging further division.
Well, I must move on. Coming on next to the constitutional issues and openings, Sir Bernard.
Chair, thank you. I'm afraid we're going to need an extra 5 or 10 minutes, and I hope that's all right.
Well, I'll need to check. I've got a plane to catch, I'm afraid, so I'll try and speak quickly.
I will. Brevity indicates no lack of respect to you, Prime Minister. Just briefly, are you aware of a single pharmaceutical company or supplier that is not able to assure its customers that they will receive their drugs on time if we leave without a deal?
I haven't been made aware of such a company.
No, I don't think there is. They're all assuring their customers they will get their drugs. And of course, the government was severely criticised after the Brexit vote because there had been no preparation for a leave vote. But that'll be 2 years and 9 months to 29th of March. Will the government be prepared to leave on the 29th of March without a deal if those are the circumstances?
We will be leaving the European Union on the 29th of March.
And the government will be fully prepared?
We are, and we are putting preparations in place.
Good. And just on the forecasts, the Treasury under George Osborne did produce forecasts just before the referendum in May 2016, forecasting a collapse in growth and jobs. How accurate were those forecasts?
Well, I think we've seen from what has happened that actually the reaction was rather different to those forecasts. If I may, the analysis that has been put forward by the government is not a forecast, it is an analysis of the trade impact.
Yes, and what you said was the economic analysis doesn't deal with the decisions the government might take. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
So basically they're rubbish, aren't they?
Well, I think there is a difference of opinion about the benefit of forecast analysis and so forth. The point is that the analysis only looks at certain elements. It doesn't look at every variable that can be brought in, can affect what happens to our economy in the future. But it is the analysis that we said we will bring forward to show the trade impacts of the various scenarios.
It's quite something when our own Chancellor and our own Bank of England Governor trashes the future of our country as part of a propaganda exercise. That's what's happening, isn't it?
That is not what is happening. That is not what is happening.
Now, on the constitutional matters,
if I may, the Treasury Select Committee has made clear that they wanted analysis from the government and analysis from the Bank of England. Both of those have been provided. They're different sorts of work. The Bank of England's is a forecast over 5 years, which, as I said earlier, does show that there would be a deal dividend from the deal that I've negotiated with the European Union. The government's analysis is analysis of the trade impact over looking ahead to 15 years. But of course it doesn't reflect other actions and other variables that would affect our economy.
Now, on the question of cabinet collective responsibility, one of the most contentious bits of the political declaration is Article 23, which states the economic partnership should build and improve on the single customs territory provided in the withdrawal agreement. Who authorised officials in Brussels to negotiate on that basis?
Well, this is a set of words which have come to take on a meaning which is not the meaning behind those words. What has happened in relation to the concept... But
who authorised that? My only question is who authorised...
Well, the political declaration was agreed by politicians, was
but
agreed by ministers.
Who authorised at what time the officials to negotiate those words?
Well, these were ongoing negotiations that were taking place throughout this political declaration,
so
right until the point at which it was agreed. There was variations being made. This is a form of words.
I'm asking a who question, Prime Minister.
Sorry?
Who authorised that?
Well, ultimately, I sat down with the European Union leaders and agreed this political declaration.
Dominic Raab, as ex-EU Secretary, subsequently stated that he only found out about this policy on Tuesday, the 13th of November, the day before your long cabinet meeting. Why was that? The cabinet came together on the next day to look at the text that had been in preparation over that whole period of time. Text was changing in a variety of ways over that period of time. So it was changed without his knowledge?
No, I didn't say that.
Well, he said.
He
said that.
This piece of text is something that has been assumed to mean something that it does not mean.
Not, regardless of what it means, he clearly thought it was very important.
It does matter what this text means, actually. The single customs, first of all, the single customs territory was something we were able to achieve in the negotiations because the European Union had started off saying that Northern Ireland should be a separate customs territory from the rest of from Great Britain. We argued from February through to October that that should not be the case, and we got the agreement on the single customs territory. What has also lain behind that agreement on the single customs territory is the divisibility of the four freedoms. The divisibility of the four freedoms, or its indivisibility as the EU would look at it, has been one of the issues that's underlaying the question as to what sort of trade relationship and customs relationship the United Kingdom could have with the European Union in the future. The fact of the acceptance of the divisibility of the four freedoms in that context is important for our future negotiations. That may well be the case,
but the point is the ministerial code says ministers should take special care in discussing issues which are the responsibility of other ministers, consulting ministerial colleagues as appropriate. So why was the DEXU Secretary not consulted on this?
The DEXU Secretary was being consulted on an ongoing basis on text that was being developed within the negotiations.
But he was deputising for you in these negotiations and you didn't consult him. Why isn't that a breach of the ministerial code?
The DEXU Secretary was being consulted, as were other ministers, on an ongoing basis when this political declaration was when the political declaration was being put together.
I think I've made my point.
Yes, Prime Minister, good morning. There's an urgent question which is taking place right now, actually, on the advice of the Attorney General and the publication of it, and I'm going to be asking you some questions about that myself now. The Ministerial Code states that it is of paramount importance that all ministers give accurate and truthful information to Parliament, correcting any inadvertent error at the earliest opportunity, and that knowingly misleading Parliament leads to resignation. I asked you at the Liaison Committee on the 18th of July whether you had asked the law officers for their opinion on checkers in good time beforehand, as required by the Code and as a critical legal consideration as it sets out. You merely replied that the law officer sits around the Cabinet table and is thereby consulted, which is clearly not what the Code requires. Yet again, on Monday this week, after you had signed the withdrawal agreement, I asked you a question on your statement, how this being a treaty, which is what this is, and only a treaty, it can be lawfully compatible with the overriding statutory express repeal of the whole of the European Communities Act 1972, and whether you had sought the legal opinion of the Attorney General on this critical legal consideration in good time before your signature. You did not reply to that question. I'll ask it again. Did you seek his opinion on that issue, and will you publish that advice as required by the vote on the humble address, and which is directly relevant to compliance with the code and the full critical consideration that this legal matter clearly requires by the Attorney General before your signature and on the withdrawal agreement, and it's being laid before the House?
Sir William, you asked me this question about the fact that we had repealed in the European Union Withdrawal Act, we'd repealed the whole of the European Communities Act 1972, and that this was therefore incompatible legally with the withdrawal agreement and with the political declaration. It has always been the case that the reason we passed the European Union Withdrawal Act in relation to the bringing the European EU law, the acquis, into UK law, was to ensure that we had a working statute book when we left the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. It was always the case that alongside that, whatever the withdrawal agreement required would be legislated for in Parliament before the 29th of March 2019.
But you can't presume
so that
that.
There would be no incompatibility with these two. Well, it is up to Parliament whether it accepts that, but it was always the case, and it was always made clear that whatever was in the withdrawal agreement would be legislated for by Parliament, and that legislation obviously would take account, as it would in the implementation period, of the necessity of making putting any position into place to continue to enable the smooth function of our laws and the smooth function of that statute.
I mean, this is a very unusual situation in that this withdrawal agreement cuts across an act of Parliament which quite clearly overrides a treaty, and that is a matter of law and a matter of fact. What I do really want you to ask the question, did you in fact seek the opinion of the Attorney General on those questions, and also in relation to the Chequers questions? I'm getting no answers to these questions.
And you will know that we do not set out when we do or do not seek the opinion of the law officers, and we do not publish the full advice of the law officers. And I answered that point in earlier this week. We set out in the white paper legislating for the withdrawal agreement that the withdrawal agreement bill will make amends to the Act, to the European Union Withdrawal Act, to ensure it reflects our commitments under the withdrawal agreement. Now, obviously, Parliament has a job of scrutinising those provisions when we bring forward the bill, as it does with all legislation. But it was clear at the time, there was a recognition at the time of the interaction of the Withdrawal Act, the repeal of the European Communities Act 1972, and the legislative requirements of any future withdrawal agreement. It was set out to Parliament the process that would take place that related to those. It was very clear, and I've just set it out
again. At this moment in time, the treaty is quite clearly inconsistent with the Withdrawal Act, and I don't think anyone can dispute that.
And it was, but we were always clear that what was necessary in the treaty, what was necessary in the withdrawal agreement, would be put into place with or if there were amendments necessary, they would be put into place with the withdrawal agreement bill.
Well, we don't have much more time. I simply say, I just don't think you'll get that through Parliament in the withdrawal bill when it comes up, and it's inconsistent with the existing repeal of the European Communities Act 1972, which is absolutely axiomatic and absolutely fundamental to our leaving the European Union.
Well, the reason we undertook what we did in the European Union Withdrawal Act was to ensure that we did have there was no cliff edge in relation to the laws that were operating, that there was a smooth functioning of our laws and our statute book when we leave when we cease to become a member of the European Union. That was preparatory. That was important to do, preparatory work, because for any circumstances of leaving the European Union, it was important to have that in place. I think what you've just said to me is that if Parliament ratifies the withdrawal agreement, Parliament won't agree to put into place the legislative measures necessary to enact that
What I'm really
withdrawal
saying
agreement.
is the repeal of the European Community Act 1972 is so fundamental to this entire operation that it is quite inconceivable that under the withdrawal agreement and subsequent legislation you then modify the European Community Act 1972 and reduce the impact of the Act of Parliament that was already passed on the 26th of June with royal assent.
The circumstances in which any amendments are necessary are the circumstances in which we put into place the implementation period, which is there to ensure that there is an orderly exit from the European Union, that we have a transition through to the future relationship, that businesses are able to continue to operate as they do today, that citizens know where they stand. This is about providing reassurance to businesses and people across our country that this process will be a smooth and orderly one, and that they can have that reassurance and that confidence. I think it is entirely responsible for Parliament to recognise. We recognise that we're leaving the European Union. There is no doubt that we're leaving the European Union. The question is how we do that, and if we do that in a way that protects jobs, if we do that in a way that ensures that we're able to give people and businesses the reassurance that they need as they're going through this process.
I'm not sure that many people will be reassured at the idea that the European Community Act 1972 is going to be played around with in that way, given the fact that, as you quite rightly said, that was a decision that was taken on the referendum vote itself. But I think I have to leave it at that.
I think people will want reassurance of knowing that there is protection for their jobs, that businesses are able to, as we leave the European Union, that there will not be the disruption that people have said would be the case if we had not had that implementation period and that transition to the future relationship.
So, William, we do have to end there. Prime Minister, thank you very much. And I very much hope as well that you will agree to come back to this committee should the vote not pass and we are in uncharted waters early in the new year.
Well,
thank you.
I was going to say, I think we have arrangements for the number of times I come to the committee in any year.
Yes.
Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room. Portcullis House,